Hello, welcome back to our series from the book of Job, Lessons for Fault Finders. And this week we're going to be looking at Job 8 to 10. The Prime Minister's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, has been in the news more than perhaps he would have liked. And my keen-eyed wife spotted in the photo of him his lanyard. It had something to do with God and trust. I was curious to know that, and after a bit of research, discovered that his lanyard that holds his identity card, it says, "In God we trust, all others we monitor." And apparently that's the motto for the USA Naval Intelligence Service. And I'm guessing that Mr. Cummings has not been so keen to be on the receiving end of some monitoring that has perhaps shown a lack of trust that people should have in him, having broken the rules that he was involved in setting up. But we'll leave that to one side. I'm sure you've heard enough about that. But that motto builds on the motto of America in general. In God we trust, printed on all their notes, and a very familiar mantra for Americans, a simple motto. And yet so often, sadly, probably just a nominal thing. No thought about who is this God in whom we trust? What does it mean to trust God? That set me thinking about this book of Job. So today's title is In God We Trust. There's a question mark there. In God we trust? For Bildad, one of Job's comforters who we'll hear from, would sign up to say, yes, I trust in God. He is the God of sovereign justice. He's the God people have always believed in, the traditional God, the God that we can discern by limited observation. But what we'll see is that the faith of Bildad, along with his other comforters, fails. It's found lacking by God himself. In contrast to Job, who has a genuine trust in God that's born out of a relationship with God, but whose faith forces him to struggle to align what he knows about God, what he believes about God through his revelation of himself, and the works of God that he's now experiencing in this time of great suffering. How does he line those two up? We need to remember, heaven's verdict is that Job is a righteous man, an upright man. And we see him refusing to settle for the falsehood, for the hypocrisy, for the simplifications that are presented to him by his comforters. He has a deep desire to be right before God. But here we'll see him struggling. How can he argue his case before this God who seems to be against him? He wants to clarify things, but he can't understand God. God is a God who cannot be tamed. He trusts God and trusts him enough to bring those big questions to God as he seeks to understand his experience. Well, firstly then, we're going to think about Bildad, and I've called him the prophet of simple justice. Our modern life is afflicted with a curse that's sometimes referred to as kiss. Everybody's told to kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. And whether that's politics or church, we're told to keep things simple. Now, of course, we don't want things to be unnecessarily complex, but it's very frustrating, isn't it? When everything is just simplified down to a little headline, a little soundbite, and none of the complexities of an argument, a situation are really put forward. I know there's scientists who've complained about how science is presented in the media as just a one headline thing, and people get completely the wrong impression. Well, we're going to hear from Bildad now as he makes these prophecies, if you like. He declares this message of simple justice. And firstly, in verses 1 to 10, we're going to see his callous tradition. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, "How long will you speak these things, and the words of your mouth be like a strong wind? Does God subvert judgment? Or does the Almighty pervert justice? If your sons have sinned against him, he has cast them away for their transgression. If you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely he would awake for you and prosper your rightful dwelling place. Though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would increase abundantly. For inquire, please, of the former age, and consider the things discovered by their fathers. For we were born yesterday, and know nothing, because our days on earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you, and tell you, and utter words from their heart? Bildad has heard Job's bitter complaint and has no empathy. He presumes that Job is simply trying to distract from the simple, plain, unavoidable truth that he has sinned. He's distracting by trying to accuse God of injustice. Verse 3, does God subvert justice? But Bildad hasn't really been listening to Job. Job has been driven in his anguish to pour out words saying that he prefers death to the prospect of being without a righteousness before God. That's what he's really getting at in those laments that we've heard already. The only hope, in a sense, that Job can cling on to is the hope of finding favour with God that he thought he had, but his circumstances seem to have proved he no longer has. And Bildad, in his Callous Tradition, states that the case is closed. Look what's happened to your children. That's simple justice taking place. They must have sinned. That's why they died in such catastrophic circumstances. All you need to do now, Job, to free yourself from this suffering is to plead for mercy to this God of justice, and your prosperity will be restored. And really the arguments he's bringing are very similar to Satan's claim back in that heavenly scene in the first 2 chapters, where Satan says Job is only upright because of the things that he gets from it. And in a sense, Bildad is saying, if you come to God and have an upright life, you'll get the stuff back again that you so long for, that's so important. These new ideas you've got, these words are just vapour, they're just a wind. Stick with the solid tradition that's been proved by knowledge, by wisdom, by our ancestors. Listen to these voices. And the irony is that as he instructs Job to listen, he's proving one who hasn't listened to Job in trying to provide comfort to him. And so he goes on to speak, secondly, of natural justice from verses 11 to 22. And this is a common tool in wisdom literature. They would appeal to things that can be seen, to lessons from nature. And let's hear him say, verse 11, chapter 8, can the papyrus grow up without a marsh? Can the reeds flourish without water? While it is yet green and not cut down, it withers before any other plant. So are the paths of all who forget God, and the hope of the hypocrite shall perish, whose confidence shall be cut off, and whose trust is a spider's web. He leans on his house, but it does not stand. He holds it fast, but it does not endure. He grows green in the sun, and his branches spread out in his garden. His roots wrap around the rock heap, and look for a place in the stones. If he is destroyed from his place, then it will deny him, saying, I have not seen you. Behold, this is the joy of his way, and out of the earth others will grow. Behold, God will not cast away the blameless, nor will he uphold the evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughing, and your lips with rejoicing. Those who hate you will be clothed with shame, and the dwelling place of the wicked will come to nothing. Natural justice. Nature itself teaches us by these tall, proud reeds that grow up so quickly, so high, and yet wither almost overnight when there is no water. So will be true of those who are godless, those who are hypocrites, who say they believe in God but who have some secret sin. Their lack of God will soon be shown. The things that they trust in, their riches, their falsehood, will be like a spider's web, flimsy and unable to bear any pressure. They'll be like an immovable tree that had roots going down into the stones, but that will be fallen and denied and replaced. God sees. God rewards, and he does so now. Referring back to verse 6, there's an immediacy. Surely now he would awake for you. God brings justice now. But his arguments are attractive in a sense, but don't really stack up against experience, because elsewhere in the scriptures we see godly people struggling with the problem of why wicked people seem to prosper so much and endure so much in the here and now. They get away with so much. Read Psalm 73, for example. And furthermore, Bildad has no regard for Job's record, his demonstrable blamelessness that he's perhaps relying on to support his claims that there's nothing specific that would have caused such terrible suffering to be brought upon me. Bildad's ignoring all of that. And there's an irony here almost as he speaks words at the end of his short speech that God will come and acquit the righteous, but Job is the righteous one who will be acquitted. The self-righteous Bildad and his friends are the ones who will be clothed with shame. Their dwelling place will come to nothing. They will be proved to be the wicked ones who spoke falsehoods about God, even though they were lecturing Job on how to resolve his problems. Suffering certainly throws up many questions, doesn't it? And I wonder if you've got questions about the complexities of life at the moment, even perhaps through personal suffering yourself. What do you trust? What sort of God is there? You had a simple faith, perhaps in God, perhaps in yourself, a sort of a humanist outlook, or an atheistic worldview that says there is no God. There's a simple faith that seemed to work well enough when all was in place, all was settled, all was certain. If there is a God, well, I'm good enough for God, maybe you thought. Or maybe you just think, well, I'm good without God, and if there is God, if there is a God, and if there is eternal life, then a system of natural justice will prevail. I'm not as bad as lots of other people. I'm a pretty decent person, so all will be fine. And you've lived your life according to that, as the certainties of life seem to support you. But when all of that is cut away, and the only certainty left is death and taxes, it's caused a crisis of faith. And I hope that crisis of faith is causing you to think deeply, yes, about the God of justice that the Bible talks about, who sees all things, who knows all things, who will not turn a blind eye to our rejection of him, our rebellion against him. But your questions will force you to consider a God who is also merciful, merciful to those who humbly seek him. That you will heed the warnings from the Bible, from the events that you're currently experiencing, to no longer ignore God, to ignore his good news message, to think that, to remember that God will not be mocked. He will not stand by. And yet he is a God who desires to save sinners. Bildad had yet to learn about the true nature of God. Rather than finding fault in Job, he should learn the lesson from the example of Job's faith. Job trusted God was big enough to endure faith's searching, humble questions that Job had, that Job gives voice to. They're coming from a place of faith. And those questions would not be satisfied with simple answers, answers that raised more questions than they fixed. So that's Bildad, the prophet of simple justice. And so secondly, we're going to turn to Job. I've called him the prophet of inaccessible justice. Maybe you've heard of cases where people have got a good case against somebody. Somebody's done them a great injustice, perhaps a big firm. But taking them to court would be so costly. They just don't have the resources, and they have no confidence that they would win against a powerful firm with good lawyers. And so they're forced to settle for injustice. And Job is protesting that he is blameless. But the Lord's dealings with him, and he believes very firmly in that God is sovereign, that these things happen because of God's purposes. But those dealings with him imply that somehow God is angry with him. God has found fault with him. And Job is feeling a sense of hopelessness because he has no way, he feels, to be able to present his case to God. So we're going to hear as Job gives voice to the wrestling that comes from his faith. Firstly then, verses 1 to 13 of chapter 9. And I've given this the title, An All-Powerful and Invisible Ruler. And I hope that as we're reading through fairly quickly and just giving a few guiding thoughts, that will inspire you to go and read these chapters again for yourself and to read them with understanding. Job is a hard book in many ways, trying to discern what is true and right and what the meaning of some of these lengthy speeches is. But I hope that as we're going through it and giving that opportunity to hear from their voices, it will inspire you to listen again and read for yourself and study these things. So chapter 9 and verse 1. Then Job answered and said, "Truly I know it is so, but how can a man be righteous before God? If one wished to contend with him, he could not answer him one time out of 1,000. God is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who has hardened himself against him and prospered? He removes the mountains, and they do not know, when he overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals off the stars. He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He made the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. He does great things past finding out, yes, wonders without number. If he goes by me, I do not see him. If he moves past, I do not perceive him. If he takes away, who can hinder him? Who can say to him, what are you doing? God will not withdraw his anger. The allies of Rahab lie prostrate beneath him." Yes, I agree, Job says. He is a God of justice, but I can't get this justice. I can't plead my just cause before him because God is unfathomable in his wisdom and creation shows his unstoppable power. He seems to act in a way that's completely unaccountable. He shakes even the pillars of the earth that normally in the Bible would speak of the stability that God brings to the created order. And yet here the picture is of God shaking it from its very foundations. He is a God who is invisible. He cannot be perceived. He passes by and you don't even know he's there. How can you catch hold of him when everyone made in his earth is in awe of him? This invisible, powerful God who leaves his enemies. The pictures there, the word there, Rahab, or the proud, speaking of the enemies of God, perhaps even also when he's walking on the sea and speaking about having set the stars in place that perhaps according to mythology would have spoken of forces against God. All of these things are within his control. He has power over them. They all fall before him. So basically, nobody stands a chance before him, whoever they may be, because of the sort of God that we're dealing with. But he then turns to a more personal note as we pick up his reply in verse 14 through to 24. "How then can I answer him and choose my words to reason with him? For though I were righteous, I could not answer him. I would beg mercy of my judge. If I called and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice. For he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not allow me to catch my breath, but fills me with bitterness. If it is a matter of strength, indeed, he is strong. And if of justice, who will appoint my day in court? Though I were righteous, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I were blameless, it would prove me perverse. I am blameless, yet I do not know myself. I despise my life. It is all one thing. Therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. If the scourge slays suddenly, he laughs at the plight of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the face of its judges. If it is not he, who else could it be?" In that title, Persecuted to Confusion, as he turns from the general revelation of God to his own personal experience of being crushed and wounded by God. He's under constant surveillance and feels so intimidated. And Job fears that whatever he does, he's going to end up condemning himself. If he speaks of his righteousness, the words will be swallowed up. He will not know what to say before God. Doesn't know what to think. And so he blurts out, verse 21, I'm blameless, yet I do not know myself. I despise my life and say, it's all the same, it seems to me. From my experience, I'm so confused. This God is a God who is sovereign and vengeful. And therefore, whether you are wicked or whether you are innocent is entirely irrelevant. It's as if he's answering his comforters who keep telling him about this wisdom that they have. My experience, he says to them, proves that this system of natural justice, this tradition that you keep telling me about, is not universally true. Yes, we can look at creation, we can look at God's dealings and understand much about God, but not always. We need him to reveal something more of his character beyond the immediate material world and the history of his works. Because sometimes the works that he performs, we can't then discern what his character is from them. And I think that's what Job has been struggling with. He's persecuted to confusion. He's confused about this God and what step he should take next in faith. But in the final section of this chapter, verses 25 to 35, we see a faint hope in a sea of despair. Let's hear his words. Now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee away. They see no good. They pass by like swift ships, like an eagle swooping on its prey. If I say I will forget my complaint, I will put off my sad face and wear a smile. I'm afraid of all my sufferings. I know that you will not hold me innocent. If I am condemned, why then do I labour in vain? If I wash myself with snow water and cleanse my hands with soap, yet you will plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes will abhor me. For he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together. Nor is there any mediator between us, who may lay his hand on us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and do not let dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him. But it is not so with me. Again, Job returns to that theme. The prime of his life is vanishing before him as quick as anything. And if he heeded the idea perhaps to just pack up his troubles in his old kit bag and smile, 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 it would be a false hope. For his horizon is overshadowed with that sense of being condemned. He has no hope because he could never be pure before God. And it seems to him that God is determined to hold him guilty and yet not enact the death sentence. It's as if he's in this sea of despair and is perpetually drowning. And there's no hope of escape because the parties in any courtroom that could take place would be so unevenly matched. It's an unresolvable problem, and there's no one to mediate. And that's the faint hope that he sees, that actually if there were a mediator between the sinful man and the holy, righteous God, then perhaps God's wrath could be held back long enough to enable Job to present his case, get a clear verdict, and move on. Well, we're going to hear now from chapter 10 as Job returns to a lament before God, a title, Still Looking for Comfort. And Karen's going to read chapter 10 for us.
My soul loathes my life, and I will give free course to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Show me why you contend with me. Does it seem good to you that you should oppress, that you should despise the work of your hands, and smile on the counsel of the wicked? Do you have eyes of flesh, or do you see as man sees? Are your days like the days of a mortal man? Are your years like the days of a mighty man, that you should seek for my iniquity and search out my sin, although you know that I am not wicked, and there is no one who can deliver from your hand? Your hands have made me and fashioned me, an intricate unity, yet you would destroy me. Remember, I pray, that you have made me like clay, and will you turn me into dust again? Did you not pour me out like milk, and curdle me like cheese, clothe me with skin and flesh, and knit me together with bones and sinews? You have granted me life and favour, and your care has preserved my spirit. And these things you have hidden in your heart. I know that this was with you. If I sin, then you mark me, and will not acquit me of iniquity. If I am wicked, woe to me. Even if I am righteous, I cannot lift up my head. I am full of disgrace. See my misery. If my head is exalted, you hunt me like a fierce lion, and again you show yourself awesome against me. You renew your witnesses against me, and increase your indignation toward me. Changes and war are ever with me. Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Oh, that I had perished, and no eye had seen me. I would have been as though I had not been. I would have been carried from the womb to the grave. Are not my days few? Cease, leave me alone, that I may take a little comfort, before I go to the place from which I shall not return, to the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land as dark as darkness itself, as the shadow of death without any order, where even the light is like darkness.
And here we see Job engaging in a curseless lament. Why have you created me if you so despise me? Why are you turning me inside out, searching for sin? You're the one who sees and knows all. Why did you curdle me? There's a lovely phrase there. Curdled like cheese, to speak of his conception. Why did you show such care to me in life and such favour, only now to crush me and return me to dust? Seems to be a conspiracy to bring me to disgrace. Regardless of my misery, where is the compassion, Lord? Wisdom concludes that I am guilty, and yet the only answer from heaven is to imply more and more guilt through this undeserved suffering. Fresh troops keep coming. There is more war to deal with as I continue to suffer. Please just finish me off. Only the grave can bring him comfort in this scenario. And yet in the midst of all of that gloom, we see that his lamenting is energized by a faith which longs to understand. A faith which has experienced the monitoring of God, that feels that his condemnation before God is apparent for all to see in his sufferings. That's the system of natural justice that we keep coming across from the wisdom that Job seems to be struggling with to see how that works out. His suffering means he's under God's condemnation. He's heard Bildad's simplistic and callous rebukes and exhortations, and yet still he turns to God. He doesn't understand why he can trust God, and yet by laying out his questions and yearning for justice to be done and bringing that to God, he's revealing that there is there a deep trust in God. He's searching to move beyond his current despair, beyond his desire for just a moment's peace before his death. But at the moment, all he can see is that he needs darkness, the darkness of death, to blot out any chance of confusion. Well, in the midst of that darkness, it does us good to remember that we're party to the heavenly scene. Job doesn't see that. God has declared Job righteous. God has shown great mercy and forgiveness to Job in the past and is continuing to do that. Those who rely on a works righteousness, being right before God because of what they haven't done or what they have done, are effectively trusting in themselves. And any scrutiny of their behaviour by other people would soon reveal themselves to be untrustworthy. But before God, a God who sees all and who is inescapable in his justice and judgment, such people have no hope without a mediator. And that's what Job's starting to scratch at the surface of. He needs somebody to help him come before this great God. And of course, the great message of the Bible is that God has provided a mediator who not only brings warring parties together, but takes the judgment upon himself, undeserved judgment. The substitute suffers. The picture of sacrifices that Job was so familiar with, pointing forward to Jesus Christ, who knew such disgrace and the shame of mocking as he hung on the cross, as they called out, "He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if we will have him." But the cross and the resurrection surely show that ultimately God can be trusted, even when all of our life, all of our feelings, all of our laments cry out, "I've been forsaken," as Christ himself cried out from the cross. Yet we place our hands in the one who has plans and a wisdom far beyond our imagination. So if you're wondering, can I really trust God? Hear what God says. Romans chapter 10, verses 10 and 11. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture says, whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. You really can trust God. But you have to recognize that that faith in God will be stretched. Don't just stay with that simple faith. It's simple to become a believer, to become a Christian, to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and be saved. It's a simple thing for the youngest, simplest person to do. But we come to a God who is far beyond our grasp, as Paul in Romans goes on to write at the end of chapter 11. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has become his counselor? Or who has first given to him, and it shall be repaid to him? For of him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. Well, may God help us then, so that we may each fully trust in God and not be put to shame.